I'm supposed to give you an overview as to what I'm talking about, and this is about cancer. And I was one of those fortunate lackeys that got that diagnosis about 6 years ago. It'll be 6 years this coming spring. And I won't belabor you with all of the details as to how I found that out. I knew I was ill because my immune system was failing me. I didn't know why. And I also was a victim of Lyme's disease. You get Lyme's disease in Australia? Is that something you do get it over here? It's a very serious illness in the United States, and it's one of the most interesting governmental cover-ups in the United States because it destroys the tourist industry. Doesn't matter now because it doesn't matter where you tour in the United States, you're going to be exposed to Lyme ticks because they're everywhere. But I had that illness, which probably had something to do with precipitating the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that I got. And long story short was when I ended up deciding to investigate what I was up against, because I never had an illness like this before, I decided to interview oncologists. And that's what I would suggest you do. If you come up with this illness, try considering being the interviewer instead of the interviewee, because you'll be amazed at what little information the oncology industry knows about what I'm going to talk about today. They know an awful lot about how to shrink tumors, remove tumors, and so forth. But they know very little about the organic substrate nature of this illness, which of course you'll see on some of these PowerPoint slides that I've got on there that exemplify really we already have a cure for cancer. And it's innate. And the scientific community understands that quite well. And so when I interviewed the oncologist, what I found out, and I'm just going to give you some tips as to what I think you might want to consider, because I know not everybody thinks the way I do, and it's probably it used to be that the three most important words people heard from someone else was "I love you," and now maybe the three most powerful words you might hear is that you have cancer. And so when you hear those words, the first thing I would suggest that you do is don't panic. It didn't come there in your life in 3 weeks. It probably was 10, 15, 20, or 30 years in the making. And when you understand how remarkable the human body is in terms of rectifying the insults that modern humanity has placed upon us, you'll realize why it takes so long to actually get a symptomatic condition known as cancer, that you actually have a diagnosis. And so I would say the first thing you want to do is you want to interview your oncologist, and you want to find out whether or not he's on your team. If you want to deal with complementary medicine, complementary means you might be doing some conventional things, you might be doing some, quote, alternative things, and you might be doing what's known as complementary, which is a balance or a combination of the two. And there are some oncologists that are quite, these days, at least open-minded about talking to you about it. And what I would suggest that you do is find medical personnel that have a coaching sort of understanding. You're the athlete. He's the coach. And I don't care how good you are, you need a coach. And that's what I use. I use a couple of medical coaches. And since my outcome affects their profession, that is to say, future people with this illness, it's important for open-minded oncologists to know how I'm faring based on not what they just recommend to me, but what I do for myself, because they understand that this disease is quite complex. You'll hear an honest oncologist tell you that the more they study this illness, the less they understand it. And that's because there are so many variables that cause cancer to show up symptomatically in people. You'll find out that, for example, in my case, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, there are 8 different kinds, but there's probably many different kinds that you can actually determine based on analyzing the actual malignancies. And there's laboratories now, and I'll show you on the slides, where you can go for specific information in terms of the architecture of the cancer, the biochemistry of the cancer. And a regular oncologist can use this information, and you can use this information. So the good news is there's a lot of resources out there, lots of information, lots of modalities, proven modalities. I'm not talking about doing things that you're not sure about or you don't really know ironclad that this stuff is predictably favorable to your healing. But there are a lot of options out there, and that, of course, then becomes the real fly in the ointment, is that the good news is also the discouraging news, is that you have to then become the filter. you've got to ultimately make your decisions, because an oncologist doesn't do very well making decisions for you. They have lots of patients. Cancer is a huge situation in the United States. We get 600,000 people every year that die from cancer, and over twice that many that get diagnosed every year with cancer. So it's a massive industry. And if you go back and look into the hospital records, you'll find out back in the 60s, there weren't even oncology wards. There weren't even oncologists back in the 60s. And now there's entire hospitals dedicated to that industry of dealing with cancer. So I hope what you hear today isn't a lot of gloom and doom. I was given 6 months, maybe 2 years to live. And I don't know whether or not that was an accurate prediction based on anything other than the size of a mass, if I didn't do conventional chemotherapy. And when I looked at the Lymphoma and Leukemia Society's statistics on that treatment, that was grim. It was like 35% survivability in 5 years. And the likelihood of me dying after that within 6 to 12 years was nearly 100% of the kind that I had. So when I looked at the challenges presented to me, I then had to decide, well, what do I do? And I've been an agricultural consultant for almost 30 years. And I've been involved in ecological agriculture for all that time. And so when we deal with farmers, it's the same situation. You're dealing with a toxic farm that's dealing with a lot of herd health problems based on the toxics on that environment, malnutrition of the livestock. And usually when you go to a conventional farm, a stock farm in the United States, that's what I call the industrial model, you usually find that the folks that run that farm are sick as well, because there's no way you can run an industrial model of agriculture and not be susceptible to a lot of stress from all the toxins that you're exposed to on a daily basis and all the animals stressed out. So when you go in there, it's basically, okay, what do you do first? And it's a matter of undoing that which causes all this stress, all this disease, all this failure. And then you start peeling the onion, as they say in homeopathy. You peel the onion, the layer after layer. And one of the things you have to do, and you heard Graham talk this morning, if you did hear Graham talk this morning about detoxification, you got to dump that junk, which is one of the things that I found out. I did an actual a series of analysis to find out what I was poisoned with. And everybody in this room, I guarantee you, if you live in a Western culture, you're poisoned. It's impossible not to be poisoned. I mean, in the United States, mercury is a major contamination, a contributor to many illnesses. Everybody in the United States now averages an intake of 1 microgram of mercury every single day. And the only thing that's more toxic than mercury on the toxicology hazmat list is plutonium. And yet, where do they stick mercury? Right here. Good place. That's wise medicine. I hope there's no dentists that are offended here. Some of my best friends are dentists. So it was a matter of then being confronted with kind of like that Yogi Berra sort of axiom, you know, you come to a dead end in the road and you got to choose. So I decided that it's now time to walk that talk. You know, I had to figure, I had no options. They weren't giving me any hope that I was going to last more than a couple of years, if I lasted at all. And so I said, well, we've seen toxic farms become very profitable, healthy farms by doing this thing of relying on natural forces. And it's not just this pie in the sky, you know, Birkenstock wearing, granola eating kind of philosophy. It's science. It's what it is. It's removing the yield limiting factors in agriculture. It's removing the health limiting factors in the body. And that's what's happening. And when you understand how the genome works at the DNA level, it's remarkable that the body is able to absorb and reconcile the insults that we are burdened with on a day-to-day basis. It's absolutely astounding to me that the human body can do what it does without succumbing much earlier like other animals do. What kills people in cancer is not tumors, it's metastatic illness. And metastatic illness is when it jumps from the primary tumor, spreads to the brain, bone, the liver, and so forth. There's only one thing that stops metastatic illness, and that's the immune system. And you can't patent the immune system. but you sure as hell can build an immune system. And there's a lot of evidence that I hopefully will share with you today, and resources that you can get even more on the internet, various texts, various researchers that will tell you just how unbelievably fantastic the immune system is. The issue with this illness is all the illnesses, whether they're cardiovascular illnesses, diabetes. I just read a statistic a few months ago. In the United States, all babies that were born in the year 2000, 38% of them will become onset juvenile diabetics. 36%, excuse me, 38% of the girls, 34% of the boys. 36% now. If you think you want to have a healthcare crisis, have all your children become diabetics. And diabetics, I think, is probably rampant in all Western cultures. And there's a reason for that. It's the food and the lack of nutrients. It's mostly all the sugar and the carbohydrates. In the turn of the century, we were consuming 20 pounds per capita per year of refined sugar. And today, at least in the United States, we consume 165 pounds per capita per year. I was on the plane with a couple of people from England, and this woman was 40. All of a sudden hits the wall with all the health problems. And tiredness, chronic fatigue syndrome kind of issues, candidiasis or candida yeast infections. You hear the same thing over and over again, because I deal with a lot of people anymore because I've been called to do that, apparently, and I just volunteer a lot to help people that call me up. And I said to her, you probably are, also getting joint ill. She said yes. And I said, do you consume pop, soda? She said, oh yeah, She had no idea how much soda is in a can of Coke. Does anybody know how much sugar, I should say, is in a can of Coke? Somebody said 11 teaspoons. Yeah, it's 13 teaspoons per 12-ounce can of Coke or Pepsi or whatever. Your Mountain Dew's even worse. And when you can realize how much consumption that Pepsi and Coke have, and what does this do? This rates high levels of blood sugar. And so what do they look at? They look at your cholesterol levels, right? Everybody know about high cholesterol being dangerous? How many people believe high cholesterol is dangerous? Come on, be honest. Right. Most of us do. And if we don't know why. But cholesterol is kind of like blaming firemen who show up at a fire for causing the fire. It's like every time I see a fire, there's a fire truck there. Therefore, firemen cause fires. Cholesterol shows up because of all this damage to the vascular system. The liver makes tremendous amounts of cholesterol. It's very important to make. And I'll talk about that in the Milk is Medicine talk, whenever that is. I don't know when that is, but the next day or so I do a talk, Milk is Medicine. And I talk about the cholesterol myth. It is a myth. If you have high levels of cholesterol, it's already, it's kind of like if you're a farmer and you see high levels of diseases and insects plaguing your crops. And there was a famous American agronomist by the name of Dr. William Albrecht from the University of Missouri that always proclaimed, and he did 40 years worth of research, stating that insects and diseases are not the cause of crop failure, but the symptoms of a crop that has begun to fail. The immune system of the plants have caved in, and so the scavengers just take out the weak so that higher life forms, i.e. us, don't have the inopportunity to consume them because they're not healthy to consume. Well, the same thing happens with cholesterol. When you have high levels of cholesterol, it's because you probably have a lot of free radical damage, which are these compounds that rip the lining of the arteries apart. You have a deficiency of antioxidants, which sponge those free radicals out of the system, which are always found. The highest numbers of those are found where? In the fats, because the fat-soluble vitamins are your best antioxidants. Vitamins A, vitamin E, vitamin D, vitamin K. They're found in good animal fat, like egg yolk, which is really high in cholesterol. But I know people who are on virtually cholesterol-free diets, and they can't get their cholesterol down, even with Lipitor. And now you're seeing, thank God, the scandals coming out in the U.S. with the pharmaceutical drugs, Vioxx, Celebrex. I've got a whole list of them right here in USA Today. You can see two tables. These are the drugs that are pulled off the top. On the bottom chart, they're the drugs that they're going to pull, because all of them cause liver damage, kidney failure, heart valve defects, and so on. And my father, he's 86. 4 years ago, they convinced him to get on a high blood pressure medication. I said, don't do it. He's 86, What you need is he basically has a catheter in his bladder. I said, what you really need is a good piss. You need to pee. That's what you need. Get rid of that water. Drink a lot of water and eliminate the water. Well, they put him on this thing. Got this out of USA Today this week. Study links blood pressure drugs to heart disease. Well, why do you take blood pressure drugs? So you don't have a heart attack or a stroke. Study links blood pressure drugs to heart disease. And what they're saying in here is all these new channel blockers are basically deadly, and that if you want to really take a drug that's controlling blood pressure, you're better off taking a pharmaceutical diuretic. Well, there's plenty of non-pharmaceutical diuretics, aren't there? Botanical and otherwise. So if a diuretic is really the solution, why take a pharmaceutical diuretic when you could take a natural diuretic, lower the blood pressure according to the people who make the stuff, and not kill yourself with a defective heart valve problem? And this is why you're seeing all these people taking Celebrex and Vioxx. What are they? They're COX-2 inhibitors, COX inhibitors. What are COX enzymes? They're inflammatory enzymes. So what that means is we have a population of high inflammation. Anytime you want to stop me and get me going, just holler. Oh, you're okay. All right. I thought so. COX-2 inhibitors. It's all about inflammation, and so what they're doing is they're giving you anti-inflammatory drugs to curb the inflammation, when in fact the main reason why we have inflammation, one word, is insulin, and is related to what? Sugar. It's a big reason why we have inflammation is insulin. The other reason why we have a lot of inflammation is because we eat a lot of vegetable fat, omega-6 fats. Anti-inflammatory fats are omega-3 fats, which are what? Fish oils. Yeah, fish oils and oils that come from land animals that eat grass, because grass is omega-3, grain is omega-6. Plankton, the algae, all the green foods, even vegetables, are loaded with omega-3. You run it through an animal like a chicken or a cow or a fish, and they convert it to something called EPA, DHA. It's one of the most potent anti-inflammatory substances known to man. And it's all you need to do. Eat the anti-inflammatory omega-3 fats, don't eat the sugar, and you won't get the COX-2 and LOX-2 enzyme inflammation. And you won't have to take drugs that kill you, that are approved. And then when you read the FDA's comments, David Kessler used to be the head of the FDA under the Clinton administration. Here's what he said, quote, "Studies are specifically designed to determine whether a drug works. The FDA rarely requires a study specifically designed to answer safety questions. Rarely. So everybody here is a mass experiment. We are mass laboratory animal experiments by the pharmaceutical companies, admittedly by the pharmaceutical houses and the Food and Drug Administration." This article is scathing because it goes through all of the people who blew the whistle on the FDA, people who study the FDA, people who study the big pharmaceutical companies. I'm not saying you're never going to take a drug or you should never take a drug. They have their place. For acute illness, they're wonderful. Modern medicine, in my opinion, has done tremendous things when it comes to trauma. You fall out of a tree and you get a compound fracture. You're glad you lived this day and age and not 100 or 200 years ago, because they can really piece you together. When it comes to medicine like that, it's fantastic. So I'm not up here arbitrarily condemning modern medicine. What I'm saying is that chronic illness has little to do with the way modern medicine reconciles our problems. Chronic illness is lifestyle. Chronic illness is where we live and how we treat where we live. The deficiencies, the insults, that's what chronic illness is. Drugs don't reconcile environmental damage. Drugs don't reconcile deficiencies that are no longer in our food supplies, or because we have completely burned out minerals in the soil and we don't produce the right kinds of fats because cows and cattle are eating grain feedlots, eating high omega-6 grains instead of omega-3 grasses, causing all this inflammatory prostaglandins. It's real simple. This is not rocket science. They know this. All the publications document this. So it's real simple that if they want to have us get well and our kids get well, and this is the thing that really concerns me. I have a granddaughter that's 11 years old. Her generation, unless we turn this Titanic around, the generation that she represents or is a party to is facing unprecedented, unimaginable health consequences. Unimaginable. I mean, cancer rates in leukemia and lymphoma are rampant in now that age group. Brain tumors are rampant in that age group. ADHD, ADD, autism, asthma. These are all huge pandemics with children today, and they're only going to get worse. And that's not bad luck. And that's not because kids are living longer. So, we have a lot to do, but fortunately we have a lot to do it with, if we can just get the political will behind it. And it always comes down to that, doesn't it? It always comes down to getting the political will behind it. When the people lead, the leaders follow, usually. In my country, the people aren't leading because everybody in that country lives in a state of fear, and they're not even sure what they're afraid about. One of the reasons why they're afraid is they eat too much sugar. And if you eat a lot of sugar, your brain doesn't work right. And this is true. If you don't have the right kinds of essential fatty acids and the right trace elements, your brain, I just read a report yesterday on the way to the airport, studies linking memory loss to magnesium deficiency. And magnesium is the most commonly deficient mineral in the American diet. Magnesium deficiencies. This is simple. Magnesium's cheap. It's basically from rock, ground up dolomitic limestone, refined. That's all it is. So what we need to do is look at where, we take it from here, and really it comes back to going back to the soil and getting these farms to produce local foods that aren't poisonous and mineral rich. And guess what? Voila. I'm an example of that, and I know a lot of other people that are. In the milk talk, I'll talk about it, and hopefully the cancer talk, if they ever get me on here. But on the milk talk, one of the things that I did to deal with my cancer is I made a hyperimmune milk where I hyperimmunized the cow with my blood as a vaccine. And I didn't come up with this idea on my own. This came out of the Merck Sharp and Dome patent application from 1946. You ever hear of Merck? Yeah, especially lately, right? Vioxx. Well, Merck was a large serum manufacturer. Before Fleming came along with penicillin, serums were used quite a bit for health purposes, where they would hyperimmunize horses and extract the blood, refine it, and then use that as a medicinal. And they came up with a patent for using the serum called milk for any kind of imaginable illness, from polio to diphtheria to all the childhood illnesses, smallpox included. And they never went forward with the patent. They got the patent application finished, never actually went forward with it because they started getting in the manufacturing of synthetic drugs. Penicillin started that with Fleming in 1946. But I can tell you people that are doing this, doing some of the things that I have, that should have been deceased by now. And they're not. And that's not coincidental. Their oncologists think it's a mind over matter thing, or, they switched religions or something. I don't know. There's no doubt about the fact that this and this make a huge difference in getting well, If you're, one of the supplements that I take that was a pharmaceutical substance was a product called low-dose naltrexone. Hopefully we'll be able to talk about that. And it's a drug that was invented for heroin addicts to block endorphins. If you shoot up with heroin, you get high because the brain pumps out tons of endorphins. That's the euphoric feeling. They came out with this drug called low-dose naltrexone that you put as a skin implant that blocked the endorphin cascade so that you wouldn't get high, so you'd have no incentive to shoot. So it never really got very far because it caused sleeplessness and anxiety. So heroin addicts, I think, don't like to be sleepless either, or anxious. And so there was a guy by the name of Zagon, Dr. Zagon at Hershey Medical Center, which is now part of Penn State University Medical Center. He found out that if you took a homeopathic dose of this, a very minute dose, it had the opposite effect. It would cause endorphins to come out of the brain at night while you slept. You ever hear the axiom that healthier people are happier people, and happier people are healthier people, that happy people don't get sick and they recover a lot better? That's why, because endorphins raise natural killer cell levels, which is part of the immune system. So it's very important to deal with the stress issues, bad relationships, bad jobs, bad road rage on commuter traffic. All that stuff can kind of sabotage, colonics, or whatever else you're doing that you're going through great pains to get well over. It is important to have a good state of mind, and that means, what it's prayer, it's meditation, yeah, but I do know that that's a piece. But I have seen people that were in stage 4 melanoma that were not supposed to come out of the hospital. Stage 4 melanoma is as far as you can go without dying. and they're still alive because of some of the things that I'm hoping to talk to you about today. Fortune magazine, you ever hear Fortune magazine? Very conventional business magazine. March 29th, 2003. Front page article on this. And I was surprised. I picked it up at the airport on my way back from a California conference on organic dairy farming. And I said, well, I'm wondering what they're saying about this. Now, this has nothing to do with what I talk about. This has nothing to do about environmental toxins, nothing to do about lifestyle, diet, supplements, nutraceuticals, herbs, natural medicine, nothing. All it's about is the fact that they've interviewed oncologists at places like Sloan Kettering, which is one of the top cancer facilities in the United States in New York City, MD Anderson in Houston, Texas, and so on and so on and so on. And what they said is what I said earlier, is that the cancer model's failing because they don't have anything to deal with metastatic illness. Nothing. Zip. And that's what takes people's lives, is not tumors. As a matter of fact, ironically enough, when you have a primary tumor removed, you should probably only have it removed to remove it from the standpoint of it impinging on a life-threatening situation on another organ, because they find out that there's this thing called angiogenesis. What is angiogenesis? Tumors are smart. They're like separate entities. It's like you're being occupied by an alien, okay? And it wants to live, and it wants to grow, and the way it grows, the way all the other cells grow, it builds blood vessels to itself for blood supply. You have to have blood. If you're in this body, you need blood. Red blood, carrying oxygen, nutrients, removing waste. Well, if you remove the primary tumor, they find out that the primary tumor is very envious of the non-primary tumors. And so it puts out not just angiogenic chemicals, it puts out anti-angiogenic substances that keep the small tumors from taking its blood supply. And so when you remove the primary tumor, what did you do? You just shut off the blockers. And now all of a sudden, you'll hear this. Oncologists will say, you remove that tumor and the whole thing takes off like a wildfire, and that's why. And this is part of the problem you have with modern cancer therapy, is they don't understand this part in terms of how to deal with the psychology of a tumor. You got to think like a tumor, right? That's what I say. Think like a tumor, and you start getting a picture. It's an entity. It has an intention. You know, it has a DNA, it has a mitochondria, it has all the things healthy cells have. So here's the bill. All right, so here's interesting. Immune surveillance and cancer regressions. Now this is interesting. 15% of the women exhibit cervical malignancies via pap smears. Only 0.37% of women die of cervical cancer. So that's saying something. Cancer is ubiquitous. We all carry it around. Here's another one. European autopsies found 30 to 40 times thyroid and pancreatic cancers as the mortalities from the same. 30 to 40 times autopsies showed people were loaded with cancers that died from it. Men 75 years and older, 50% of you have prostate cancer. Less than 5% of men die of prostate cancer. What's going on here? Why is this happening? Where there's all this cancer that's showing up in the organs, but nobody's dying of the illness like they should be? Well, there was another study that was done by a Canadian in '88, and he did a study of 200 fully recovered Gerson. You ever hear of Gerson? Gerson is the Mexican physician that did a lot of detox and dietary issues. And what he found out, it was all these people, this is what an oncologist will say, it was a spontaneous remission or a spontaneous regression. We don't know, it's just spontaneous. But when they analyzed, the surveys were very thorough. 88% of the people in that 200 group that had total remissions made dietary changes that were significant. 63% took supplements, and only a handful, not nearly the kinds you can take today that I'll talk about. And 50% did detoxification regimens, colons and coffee enemas and things like that. So people did this spontaneous remission. These were terminally ill people, 200 people that didn't die because these are the things that they did based on the survey. So here's what's going on. I call it our endogenous cure for cancer, human cancer repair. Now, this is really fascinating. 90% of DNA adducts. DNA adducts are defects, genetic defects. When the DNA gets damaged by a toxic material or because there's nutritional deficiencies, you get a defect, and that translates into a malignancy. Short language. Okay, 90% of those defects at the gene level on the DNA are repaired within 24 hours in the human genome. 90% in 24 hours. A laboratory rat will repair 0 to 13% in 24 hours. We're special. Don't ask me why. We're special. You know, that's why we're seeing all these people that have, you know, ubiquitous presence of cancer, and they're not dying of cancer like they should be dying of cancer. So by the time you become diagnosed with cancer, a lot has happened. Lots and lots has happened. So humans are the most efficient of all animals in DNA adduct repair. So in other words, preventing cancer is obviously the solution, but this is the reason why it's a solution, because the human body knows how to cure cancer unless you insult it so badly that it's overwhelmed. It's incredibly efficient. Causes of gene adducts. What causes these things to be defective? Well, toxicity is number one, you know. So I'm calling here biological toxins are infections from viruses, yeasts, fungi, bacteria. That they produce toxic compounds. For example, Candida yeast produces something like 80 different endotoxins. Molds are very, very toxic. Bacteria produce endotoxins. Viruses are able to attack the actual genome, all right? And also the xenobiotics, halogens, chlorinated water, fluoridated water especially. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, about the whole secret of iodine and why in Japan, and we used to be Iceland, how people there didn't have nearly the incidence of cancer we have with breast, cervix, ovary, and prostate because of the iodine levels. And if you look at iodine, it's in the chemical family called the halogens on the chemical chart of elements: iodine, chlorine, fluorine, bromine. Remember this is really important, particularly the bromine one. All right. So oxidized fats. What kind of fats oxidize? Vegetable fats. Lard doesn't oxidize when you cook it because it's a saturated fat. It won't rapidly oxidize with oxygen. Corn oil does. And what have you been encouraged to do because of what? Cholesterol? Is eat oxidized, rancid fat. Doesn't lard keep pretty well? Coconut oil is another saturated fat that's excellent to cook with. You don't cook with vegetable fats. Olive oil's good, but it's better eaten raw on a salad, or dip some Toscana bread in it, sprouted grain bread, you know.